The galaxy had always been quiet for humanity. Earth was young in its exploration of the stars, only beginning to push beyond its own atmosphere to settle on distant worlds. Colonies on Mars, Europa, and distant moons were flourishing, but the galaxy was vast, and humanity was still a small player in the grand scheme of the cosmos. But that was about to change. It started with a message, one that arrived unexpectedly, transmitted from deep space. The message came in the dead of night, piercing the calm of humanity's routine existence. It was a single broadcast, a hologram that flickered to life on every screen across the colonies, whether on Earth, the Moon, or Mars. The image was stark. A tall figure, wearing a dark cloak, standing in front of an endless starry void. His face was shadowed, but his voice, deep and cold, echoed through every room, every building, and every settlement. Humanity, the figure said, his words clear and firm, you have expanded into the stars, and you have found us. We are the Galactic Empire, and we demand tribute. The message was a demand. The Empire's voice was as cold as the depths of space itself. Their offer was simple: pay tribute, or face annihilation. The hologram continued, you will provide us with resources and technology. Failure to comply will result in your immediate destruction. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Humanity, with all its hopes and dreams of a new future among the stars, was now being told to submit to a force far beyond its own. The people watched in silence, stunned and afraid. The leaders of the Earth government stared at the message with disbelief. How could this be happening? Who were these people who demanded to control the entire galaxy? The message ended abruptly. The figure's face vanished, and the screen went black. A cold silence settled over the world. In every city, in every home, people began to talk, debate, and argue. Some wanted to comply, seeing no chance against the overwhelming power of such an empire. Others, however, felt a spark ignite inside them. They refused to be bullied. The message was clear: submission or death. But humanity wasn't going to give up so easily. On Earth, the president stood before a group of military leaders, scientists, and advisors, trying to make sense of the situation. They had just received the same message, and the weight of the decision ahead was nearly unbearable. The Empire's fleet was powerful, their ships massive, and their weapons devastating. The humans had no way of knowing just how far the Empire could reach. What if this was just a small part of something much larger? The idea of facing an unknown enemy with such overwhelming strength was terrifying, but President Andrea Michaels stood tall. She had lived through countless political crises on Earth, but this was something different. This wasn't a war of words or diplomacy. This was a war for survival. I will not bow to threats, she said firmly, her voice ringing through the room. Humanity will not cower in fear. We have fought too long for freedom, and we will fight to protect it now. Her words were met with silence at first, but then the murmurs started. There was a fire in the hearts of the people. Across the colonies, humanity's response began to take shape. Soldiers, engineers, and civilians alike rallied to the cause. On Mars, construction began on new warships. On Earth, factories that had once built civilian technology were now pressed into service, creating weapons and armor. Humanity was not backing down. News of the demand spread quickly. The people, some fearful, others determined, gathered in squares and cities, discussing what to do next. Some argue for peace, for submission, but there were those who stood strong in their belief that humanity's right to exist was worth fighting for. They couldn't accept becoming another subjugated race in the galaxy. The notion of being controlled by an unknown empire was simply too much to bear. In secret, high-level meetings were held in the war rooms of Earth's governments. Humanity's scientists were called upon to assess their options. Could they possibly stand a chance? They knew they were far behind technologically, with their best ships being little more than advanced prototypes. But humanity was resilient. The one thing they had always excelled at was their ability to adapt. The humans worked tirelessly. Over the course of several days, a plan began to form. It wasn't a plan to surrender. It was a plan to fight. The military worked on ways to bolster their existing fleets with new technology, faster ships, more powerful weapons. The scientists, although limited in resources, began researching new energy sources and weapon systems that could give them a fighting chance. And most importantly, Earth's leaders made a decision that would send shockwaves through the galaxy. They would not comply with the Empire's demands. They would respond to the threat head-on. But the reality of the situation weighed heavily on them. The Empire wasn't just a group of invaders. It was a galactic power with vast fleets and untold resources. They had seen no proof of how large the Empire truly was, but every piece of information pointed to a force that could annihilate the human colonies in an instant. Still, the people would not bend. Humanity had survived countless wars on Earth, had fought against natural disasters, and had even risen from the ashes of near destruction. This time would be no different. President Michaels made a final broadcast, one that would be remembered throughout history. We are humans. We have fought for our place in the universe for as long as we have existed. We have the right to live, to grow, to expand. We will not give in to the will of an empire. We will defend ourselves, and we will fight to ensure that humanity's future is our own. The time for tribute has passed. It is time for war. Across the colonies, on ships orbiting distant moons, and in the hidden bunkers of Earth's command centers, the message was received. The human race was not going to bow down. The countdown to war had begun. No longer would humanity be a quiet species, content with its small corner of the stars. They would make their stand, and they would not go down without a fight. But as the message ended and silence fell once more, humanity could not shake the thought. Was this the beginning of the end, or was this the moment they would prove that even against the greatest odds, they could rise and conquer? The uncertainty weighed heavily on everyone. The stars, once distant and silent, had suddenly become a battleground, and the galaxy would soon know that when the Empire demands tribute, humanity does not bend. They fight. The broadcast from the Galactic Empire had left humanity in shock, but it also sparked something deeper, a determination to fight, to protect what was theirs. The quiet uncertainty that had gripped the human race ever since the first step was taken into the stars had been shattered. The Empire's demand for tribute had made one thing clear: humanity could no longer remain on the sidelines of galactic politics. They had no choice but to respond. But how? How could a species, still young and small compared to the ancient powers of the galaxy, stand up to such a force? President Andrea Michaels had not slept in days. The weight of leadership was heavy, especially now, when every decision could mean the difference between survival and extinction. The leaders of Earth had gathered in the war rooms, their faces tense, their minds racing. The question on everyone's lips was the same: what should humanity do? To submit to the Empire's demand would be to admit weakness, to hand over their future without a fight. But war was dangerous. Could they even stand a chance against an empire that had conquered countless worlds? Michaels knew that fear could not guide their decision. She had been elected to protect humanity's future, and she would not let fear make that choice for her. She stood up, her face hardening with resolve. "We cannot submit," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "This empire doesn't just want tribute, they want control. We cannot allow them to take what is ours." Her words hung in the air, and the room was silent. There were murmurs of agreement, and then one by one, the other leaders nodded. Humanity would not back down. They would fight, but they had no illusions about the challenge ahead. The Empire's fleet was vast. Their technology advanced beyond anything humanity had ever seen. The human ships were powerful, yes, but they were not nearly as advanced. Still, there was something the Empire didn't understand: humanity's resilience, its ability to adapt, to think on its feet. In the weeks that followed, the response took shape. Across Earth and the colonies, a wave of unity swept through the human race. People who had never before been involved in space exploration or military matters were now volunteering to fight, to contribute in any way they could. Scientists worked day and night, trying to develop new technologies that could match the Empire's power. Engineers designed ships and weapons, while soldiers trained harder than they ever had before. This wasn't just a war for survival, it was a war for their very. The media played its part, broadcasting the speeches of the president and other leaders to every corner of human space. The message was clear: we will not bow down. We will fight. President Michaels addressed the public once more, her speech filled with fire and passion. The stars belong to all of us. We will not let anyone take that away from us. We will stand together and fight for our future. Her words were met with overwhelming support, and the human response was swift. On Mars, work on a new class of warships began in secret, far away from the watchful eyes of the Empire. These ships weren't as sleek as the Empire's vessels, but they were designed with one thing in mind: survival. They would be fast, nimble, and equipped with advanced weaponry. Every part of the ship, from the engines to the weapons systems, was being constructed with the knowledge that the human race couldn't afford to fail. Back on Earth, military leaders began coordinating their forces. The existing human fleet was small, but it was well-trained. They knew the Empire's fleet would likely be massive, but they also knew the Empire had never faced an opponent like humanity. The humans might not have the most advanced technology, but they had something better: the ability to fight with everything they had. In every part of human space, from the icy moons of Jupiter to the deserts of Mars, soldiers prepared for the worst. They didn't have the luxury of time. The Empire's fleet was rumored to be on its way, and soon they would be in orbit, demanding their tribute. As the days passed, the tension grew. Everyone knew that time was running out. The Empire wouldn't wait forever. They would come, and when they did, humanity would either stand firm or fall. There was no middle ground. But despite the uncertainty, there was also a growing sense of pride. Humanity was standing together, something they had never done before on such a scale. The fear that had once crippled them was being replaced with something stronger: resolve. Then the first sign of the Empire's approach came. A massive fleet, so vast it seemed to block out the stars, appeared on human scanners. The human fleets, though still in the early stages of preparation, quickly scrambled to position themselves. The moment had arrived. President Michaels addressed the public again, her voice unwavering. The Empire thinks they can scare us into submission. They don't understand who we are. They don't understand what we're capable of. This is our home, our future. We will protect it. As the days turned into hours, the human fleets gathered, readying their weapons, preparing for the worst. Each ship was a testament to the determination of the human race. The crews, both young and old, were ready to face whatever the Empire threw at them. Some had lost loved ones to the harshness of space. Others had never fought a battle in their lives. But now, they were all soldiers, united by a common cause. In the control room of one of the human ships, Commander John Carter stood at the helm. His hands gripped the controls tightly as he watched the Empire's fleet draw closer. His heart raced, but his mind was clear. "We're ready," he muttered to himself. "We'll show them what humanity can do." The enemy fleet came into view, a dark, imposing wall of ships, each one bristling with weapons and technology beyond human comprehension. The first blast of energy from an Empire warship cracked through the silence of space, and the battle began. For the first time, humanity would face its greatest test. The ships engaged, their weapons firing, and the fight for their future started in earnest. The Empire was unprepared for the kind of fierce resistance it encountered. The human ships were small, but they darted around the larger vessels, using their speed and maneuverability to their advantage. They struck hard, hitting the Empire's warships with surprise attacks, testing the limits of their technology. Back on Earth, people watched in awe as the battle unfolded across their screens. Every victory, every blow struck against the Empire. was a sign that humanity wasn't as weak as the Empire had thought. The resistance was fierce, and it was clear humanity was not going to give up without a fight. But even as the first shots were fired, it became clear that this would not be a quick victory. The Empire was vast, its forces immense, and the battle would not be easily won. However, the human response was one of unyielding courage. They weren't just defending their colonies. They were defending their right to live freely among the stars, and they would fight for it with everything they had. The battle was far from over, but one thing was certain: humanity would not be cowed. They had responded, and they had shown the galaxy that they would not be taken lightly. The war for the future of the human race had only just begun. The silence of space was deafening, the calm before the storm. Humanity had fought fiercely in the first clash with the Empire, but the victory was only temporary. Now, after weeks of constant battles, the galaxy held its breath. The Empire's forces had regrouped, their ships more numerous than ever, and their firepower was overwhelming. Yet, despite the odds, humanity had not backed down. Every skirmish had left its mark, every victory had been hard-earned, and every loss had made their resolve even stronger. Commander John Carter stood on the bridge of the horizon, his eyes fixed on the flickering displays in front of him. It was hard to ignore the toll the war had taken on the fleet. Ships were missing, crews had been lost, and morale was beginning to fray at the edges. But there was something in the air now, something that hadn't been there before. A whisper of hope, a belief that the turning point of the war was near. "We've pushed them back before," Carter said, his voice steady despite the weight on his shoulders. "And we can do it again. We just need to find a way to hit them where it hurts." The officers around him nodded, their faces hard with determination. The Empire had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back, but that didn't mean the war was over. Every human ship still in the fight was a symbol of defiance. They might be smaller, less powerful, but they were relentless. They would never surrender. The Empire had made a mistake, one that was about to cost them dearly. While they had been focused on overwhelming humanity with sheer numbers, they had neglected something crucial. They hadn't considered the human spirit. The spirit to fight, to survive, to push back when everything seemed lost. And now, that spirit was beginning to manifest in ways the Empire could never predict. The key to turning the tide of the war lay in an unexpected source: human ingenuity. A secret plan, months in the making, was about to come to fruition. Carter had known about it from the start, but he had kept it under wraps, aware that the risk was too high to reveal it too soon. The plan was simple, almost reckless in its boldness, but it had one major advantage: it was unexpected. The Empire had assumed that the humans would crumble under the weight of their numbers. What they hadn't counted on was that the humans would use their greatest strength, their ability to adapt and innovate in the face of overwhelming odds. "Prepare the fleet," Carter ordered, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "It's time to execute the plan." The orders spread like wildfire through the fleet. Ships that had been scattered across the galaxy, recovering from the previous battles, now began to converge. The Empire had no idea what was coming. The element of surprise was all they had, and they were going to use it to the fullest. As the human ships moved into position, Carter watched as the coordinates for the attack were fed into the system. Every move had to be precise. They couldn't afford any mistakes. The Empire was too powerful, and one slip-up could mean the end of the fight. He felt the weight of the responsibility press down on him. But there was something in his chest, a fire, a spark of something that refused to die. They had fought too long, lost too much, to let it end here. They would fight until the last. The plan was simple but dangerous. The human fleet would feign retreat, drawing the Empire's forces into a trap. The Empire, believing the humans were on the verge of collapse, would follow, eager to crush what remained of the resistance. But that's when the trap would spring. Humanity's remaining ships would strike from multiple directions, using the terrain of nearby asteroid fields and abandoned stations as cover. The Empire's formations, so carefully designed, would be shattered by a sudden, unexpected assault. It was a gamble, but it was the only chance they had. Initiating Phase 1, Carter said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside him. The first part of the plan began. Human ships pulled back, as if retreating under the pressure of the Empire's forces. It was a calculated move, one that required absolute trust in every officer and soldier on board. The Empire, seeing their retreat, began to advance, pushing their massive warships forward, convinced they had won. But as the human ships slipped behind asteroids and debris, they prepared for the fight of their lives. The tension was unbearable as the Empire's fleet closed in, unaware of the trap. The human fleet, waiting in silence, held its collective breath. The countdown had begun. Every ship, every commander, every crew member knew their role. It was now or never. Then, without warning, the human ships emerged from the shadows. Energy blasts filled the void as they opened fire on the Empire's formations. The first wave of Empire ships, unprepared for the sudden assault, were thrown into disarray. Explosions erupted as the smaller human ships darted through the chaos, targeting weak points and firing with deadly precision. The Empire's massive ships, unable to move quickly enough in the dense asteroid field, were vulnerable. Humanity had caught them off guard. But the Empire didn't give up easily. They fought back with ferocity, launching missiles and energy blasts in retaliation. The space around them lit up with the fire of battle, a blinding kaleidoscope of destruction. Yet the human fleet pressed on, outmaneuvering the Empire's ships, using their smaller size and faster speeds to their advantage. For every blast that struck one of their ships, the humans dealt two in return. They were relentless, determined, and for the first time, the Empire began to falter. "We've got them on the ropes," Carter muttered to himself, watching the battle unfold before him. His fingers gripped the controls of the horizon, his eyes scanning the battlefield. The Empire's ships were beginning to break apart, their once perfect formations turning into a chaotic mess of burning wrecks. They had underestimated humanity's resilience, and now they were paying the price. But the battle wasn't over. The Empire's command ship, a massive dreadnought, still loomed at the center of the conflict. It was the heart of their fleet, and if it fell, the Empire would be crippled. Carter knew this was the turning point. This was the moment they had been waiting for. With a final, desperate push, the human fleet converged on the dreadnought. The Empire's forces, weakened and disorganized, were no match for the onslaught. Ships fired at the dreadnought from every angle, their weapons pounding the massive vessel. The Empire's flagship shuddered as the first direct hit landed, and then another. The shields began to flicker, and the dreadnought started to fall. The Empire's command ship exploded in a flash of light, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. It was over. The turning point had come, and humanity had won. The Empire, broken and scattered, was no longer the unstoppable force it had once been. Carter stood in silence as the battle around him came to a halt, the realization settling in. The first victory of this war wasn't just a small step. It was a statement. Humanity had fought back, and they had shown the galaxy that no force, no matter how mighty, could ever break their spirit. As the fleet began to regroup, Carter looked out into the vast expanse of space. This was only the beginning, but for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope. The tide had turned, and the Empire would never forget the cost of underestimating humanity. The cold expanse of space seemed to hold its breath as humanity's final battle against the Empire approached. After months of relentless war, the human forces had been pushed to their limits. Their fleets, though formidable, were battered and scattered. The Empire, once overconfident in its superiority, now faced a fight for survival. Commander John Carter stood on the bridge of the horizon, staring at the view screen, where the fleet's scattered ships were slowly coming together for one last stand. This was it, the final confrontation. There would be no retreat, no second chances. Humanity's survival hung in the balance. The Empire's forces were closing in. Their fleet, though still vast, was showing signs of weakness. Every battle they fought had cost them dearly. Ships had been lost, commanders had fallen, and their once immense morale was now shattered. Yet the Empire had one final weapon, a massive dreadnought, unlike any other ship they had built before. It was the pinnacle of their technology, a ship so powerful that it could wipe out entire fleets with ease, and it was heading straight for Earth. Carter's heart pounded as he looked at the map of the battlefield. The dreadnought was surrounded by a fleet of hundreds of smaller ships, each bristling with weapons. They were determined to finish what they had started, to crush humanity once and for all. The human fleet, though fewer in number, was still standing strong, every ship willing to fight to the last. This was the moment that would decide everything. "We're outnumbered, but not outgunned," Carter muttered to himself. "We've got one shot at this." His officers gathered around him, their faces grim but determined. There was no more time for tactics or strategies. They knew what had to be done. They had trained for this, prepared for it, and now it was time to put everything they had learned to the test. They would have to use the Empire's overconfidence against them. It was a desperate plan, but it was the only chance they had. "Prepare the fleet," Carter ordered. "We go in full speed. The dreadnought is our target. We hit it with everything we've got, and we hit it hard. This is our last chance." As the human fleet moved into position, the tension on the bridge was unbearable. The last remnants of humanity's forces were about to face the Empire's greatest weapon. There would be no room for mistakes, no chance for failure. Carter glanced at the crew, each of them aware of the gravity of the situation. They had fought for this moment, and they would not back down. The time for fear had passed. The first wave of human ships surged forward, opening fire on the Empire's outer ships. The space around them lit up with explosions, the crackling sound of energy blasts tearing through the emptiness. Human ships darted in and out of formation, using their agility to dodge the Empire's return fire. The dreadnought loomed in the distance, its dark silhouette blocking out the stars. It was a monstrous ship, larger than any human vessel, and it seemed impenetrable. But Carter knew the truth. No ship, no matter how advanced, was invincible. Every ship had weaknesses. They just had to find them. The first few minutes were chaos. Human ships engaged the Empire's smaller vessels, drawing their attention away from the dreadnought. They moved in tight formations, weaving through the debris of destroyed ships and the rubble of shattered asteroids. It was a dangerous maneuver, but the human fleet had learned to survive by being unpredictable. They could not win in a direct fight. They had to outthink the Empire, to outsmart them at every turn. The dreadnought fired its massive cannons, sending beams of energy that turned human ships into dust. Every time a ship was lost, the remaining humans fought harder, their will to survive burning brighter. The stakes had never been higher. Earth, their home, was in grave danger, and there was no time left for hesitation. As the human ships closed in on the dreadnought, Carter's mind raced. They had planned for this moment, but it wasn't going as smoothly as they had hoped. The Empire's defenses were stronger than anticipated, and their weapons were more powerful than expected. One by one, human ships fell under the weight of the Empire's firepower. The odds were against them, but humanity had one thing the Empire could never understand: resilience. "We can't stop now," Carter said, gritting his teeth. "We have to break through. All ships, focus on the dreadnought. We hit it with everything we've got." The final push began. The remaining human ships surged forward, determined to reach the heart of the Empire's fleet. Every weapon they had was aimed at the dreadnought, every crew member fighting with everything they had left. There was no room for error. The dreadnought's shields flickered under the barrage, but they held strong, pushing back the human forces. Carter watched as ships around him exploded in bursts of flame. The pain of each loss was almost unbearable, but he couldn't stop now. There was no time for grief. He had to keep moving forward, keep fighting. The dreadnought was close. It was within reach. All they had to do was breach its defenses and take it down. Suddenly, a massive explosion ripped through the human fleet. One of their key ships had been destroyed, sending shockwaves through the rest of the fleet. The attack had been unexpected, and for a brief moment, chaos reigned. The Empire's forces had found an opening, and they took full advantage of it. The dreadnought's shields were down, but they had set a trap. "We're losing control," one of the officers shouted. "We can't hold them off much longer." But Carter didn't give up. His eyes narrowed as he saw the weakness in the Empire's formation. The dreadnought's defenses had been weakened, but it wasn't enough. The remaining ships could still deal a devastating blow. They just needed to focus everything on the final strike. "Reroute all power to the forward cannons," Carter ordered, his voice sharp. "We go in one last time." The remaining ships focused all their firepower on the dreadnought, sending every blast they had toward its core. The massive ship began to shake as the first wave of hits landed. The dreadnought's shields faltered, and the Empire's massive flagship began to show signs of damage. This was it, the moment humanity had fought for. With a final, concentrated blast, the human ships tore through the dreadnought's last defenses, striking its heart. The dreadnought's engines exploded in a blinding flash, sending shockwaves through the surrounding space. The Empire's flagship, the symbol of their power, was no more. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, as the human fleet regrouped, cheers erupted. The dreadnought had fallen. The Empire's greatest weapon had been destroyed. And with it, their hope of victory. Humanity had won. Against all odds, they had stood their ground. The final stand had been the turning point they needed. Earth was safe. For now. As the remaining ships returned to Earth, Carter stood alone on the bridge, staring into the stars. The battle had been long, and the cost had been great. But humanity had proven its worth. The final stand had ended in victory, but it was only the beginning of the new future they had won. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, humanity had something to hold on to: hope.